Probably new for some folks. I know I've been promoting this and interacting on some other shows and things like that. And give me like the elevator pitch of how Mike Barron ended up doing comic book stories for a living, for the lack of a better expression.
Well, I always wanted to write fiction. I wanted to write novels and I wanted to write comics. I was inspired by John D. MacDonald and Carl Barks. Uh, my first job out of college was smoking marijuana for the government. I answered an ad in the back pages of the Boston Phoenix looking for volunteers to live on a hospital ward for a month, smoke government grown marijuana every day, and take a battery of tests. It was just like college. When I got out, I wrote that up and I sold the story to the Boston Phoenix. So they hired me as a writer and I became their music editor. But I always wanted to write fiction. I sat down a couple of times and tried to write a novel by the seat of my pants. And I soon realized I didn't know what I was doing, but I always had a flair for writing comics. I don't know why. I just had this unshakable faith that I knew how to do it. And I was working at an insurance company in Madison, Wisconsin, one day in the 80s when I got a phone call from an editor who said, there's a guy down here who's trying to sell us his art and you should take a look at it. So it was Steve Root, and I met the dude. He showed me his portfolio, and we agreed to work together. We just happened to be at the right place at the right time. In the Capital City Distribution, the second largest distributor of comics in the world at the time, decided to publish their own books. So I went home and I brainstormed the first 12 pages of Nexus. And I drew it out by hand, which is how I wrote comics for 20 years. I would draw each page out by hand, panel by panel, figure by figure. I'm not a great artist, but I'm good enough that I can get my ideas across and that artists and editors could recognize immediately what I was trying to say. And they all loved that method of writing. Archie Goodwin did it as well. And so did a couple other guys. I think Chuck Dixon has done it. And it's a very important exercise for those who want to create comics. I would recommend you trying that because it teaches you so many things. It teaches you how much weight a page can bear. But most importantly, it teaches you what happens next, which is the essential question in all fiction. Because I would write panel by panel like an inchworm, inching along, and I do one panel and try to make that panel count. My focus was on the next moment. It wasn't on the rest of the story, although I had story structure in the back of my mind. It was on the next moment. And I think that's one of the reasons that my comic writing has been so successful, is because I focus on one panel at a time while keeping the story structure in the back of my mind. So I drew those first 12 pages out and I gave them to the dude, and he penciled them and inked them and lettered them, and we showed them to the boys at Capitol, and they said, yeah, we want to do this, and we were off and running.
Awesome.
And shortly after that, I approached them about doing another book, and I just discovered Jeffrey Butler by his art on a poster down on the University of Wisconsin campus. And I asked Jeffrey to throw in with me. And I said, what do you want to draw? He said, well, I want to draw druids. So I wrote this 10-page story about a peculiar druid who was so cantankerous that the other druids took up a collection and hired the Vikings to put him in a coma, sail west, and drop him off the edge of the earth. But as you know, they didn't get to the edge of the earth. They reached Wisconsin instead. And Jeffrey drew those out. We took them in and showed them to the boys, and he said, nah, nobody wants to read about druids. Give us a costume crime fighter. And I said, Jeffrey, they don't want to read about druids. He said, well, I'm not going to waste these pages. I said, fine. So then I dreamed of the Badger. And the Badger was easy because I They say, give us a costume crime fighter. And my first reaction was, why would anybody put on a costume and fight crime? They'd have to be crazy. And I was reading the Minds of Billy Milligan at the time by Daniel Keyes, which is one of the first serious studies of multiples. And it was Madison, so it was Badger this and Badger that, and that's how the Badger was born.
Awesome.
And those books got out, and they started to attract a little attention. And because of that, Carl Potts called me from Marvel and asked me to write The Punisher. And Mike Gold, who'd been my editor at first, moved to DC and asked me to write The Flash. And so I kind of spread into mainstream comics like that. And for 20 years, I wrote mainstream comics.
Beginning with issue number 1, Mike Baron wrote Marvel's The Punisher for over 5 years, approaching it as a straight crime comic, without any superheroes, aliens, or robots. Over the course of 60 issues, Baron elevated the gritty anti-hero into one of the most popular and enduring characters in the Marvel Comics universe. Now he brings that same ultra-realistic intensity to his latest graphic novel, Thin Blue Line. In the middle of a long, hot summer, a police shooting ignites a city. Activists, opportunists, and provocateurs descend to riot, loot, burn, and kill. Thin Blue Line follows Officer Valeria Baca and her partner as their detail guarding the mayor turns into a battle for survival. Ride along on this harrowing tale of 2 brave law enforcement officers fighting for their community and their own survival in a world gone mad. Eisner winner Mike Baron has created an alarming tale that unflinchingly examines human fallibility on every level. Along with penciler Joe Arnold, himself a full-time police officer, and talented anchor Jeff Slemons, they've created a moving and entertaining story ripped straight from today's headlines. Thin Blue Line exposes the defund the police movement and its consequences for society, but several comic book companies have refused to publish it. Now we're asking you to join the effort to distribute it independently and help support the men and women of law enforcement. Get your copy of the only graphic novel to offer an unflinching and not always flattering look at the men and women of law enforcement during a time when we need them the most. Not all heroes wear capes. It's a thin blue line between the rule of law and a world of chaos. Which side are you on? Thin Blue Line by Mike Baron. Order now on Indiegogo.